Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Simone Sanders. I serve as a senior advisor for the Biden for President campaign, and I am very excited to be your moderator for today's town hall on the impacts of COVID-19 in communities of color. We have a very illustrious conversation and panel for you today, and I'm just excited. You know, the reality is that while African American folks across the country and communities of color are not the majority of folks simply infected by the virus, they are the majority of folks who have been who disproportionately die of the effects of COVID-19. Why is that? There are questions that folks have been asking across the country, questions that Vice President Biden has been getting. And today, this town hall will seek to answer some of your questions, to have a engaging conversation about the realities that folks across the country are dealing with some experts on the issue. So the first person I would like to introduce to you today is who this town hall is featuring, the great and illustrious senator from California, Senator Kamala Harris. Senator Harris, as many of you know, has been talking about not just the coronavirus, but also what we can do to affect change in our communities about this. She serves on a number of committees, including the Homeland Security Committee in the United States Senate. She recently wrote an op-ed, in essence, that I hope many of you saw, that spoke specifically about the impacts of the coronavirus in our healthcare system as it relates to Black women. And so at this point, I would like to turn it over to Senator Harris to give you an overview, a welcome, some good information, and then we will jump in with some of our additional panelists. Thank you for being with us today, Senator. We are very excited about this.
Thank you, Simone, and it is wonderful to be with you. Thank you for your leadership ongoing, and thank you to Vice President Joe Biden for bringing us together today and for organizing this. I'm honored to be on this panel with my friend and colleague, the Congresswoman Marcia Fudge, Bishop Mackenzie, and then of course, Dr. Brooks. So thank you. It's an honor to be with everyone, and greetings to everyone out there. So let's get right into it. We are in the middle of a pandemic. This is a public health crisis, and it has manifested itself in many ways, including also an economic crisis. And when we look at the disparities and the impact on the African American community, both in terms of the public health piece, the economic piece, I would also say about the educational piece, what this pandemic has done is it has put a microscope on what have been long-standing disparities based on race in America. And as we all know, folks who are doing badly before during a crisis do even worse. And that's what we've experienced. So where are we? Well, starting actually in early February, when we were still convening in the United States Senate, as Simone said, I serve on the Homeland Security Committee. I asked back then and demanded that we hear from the Trump officials about where we are and how they were going to take responsibility for this pandemic. And I will tell you, as a member of the United States Senate, watching this up close, I'm in Washington, D.C. right now, the failure of leadership from the current president of the United States has contributed in many ways to the pain and the struggle and the harm that our country has faced because of this pandemic. Take, for example, the fact that if you just look at a quick chronology of events, in January, the intelligence community of the United States warned Donald Trump about the pandemic. From starting in January through the beginning of March, I've counted 34 times. The president went in front of a camera and minimized the seriousness of this pandemic and even dared to call it a hoax. He has put a muzzle on public health officials and people who rightly, because of their dedicated research and expertise, have been trying to give us information that is in our best interest. But yet we have a president who has failed to embrace the truth, to embrace science, to speak the truth, and to elevate the American people. And that's why I'm so proud to be on in this meeting, sponsored and organized by Joe Biden, who is completely the opposite, who is someone who speaks truth, who embraces fact, and knows how to speak truth, even when it is difficult for us to hear, but he's a true leader in that way. And he is the kind of person who not only has the skills and the experience to lift up the circumstance of the American people during a crisis, but also to lift up our spirits. So let's get right into the impact on the African American community. Public health impact. Black people have been 30% of the deaths from the coronavirus, COVID-19, despite the fact that we are only 13.4% of the population. When you look at pre-existing conditions, we are 20% more likely to have asthma, 40% more likely to have high blood pressure. Black women are 3 times more likely to have lupus, which is an autoimmune disease, than white women. When you look at sickle cell anemia, a respiratory virus in an illness like COVID-19 preys on those who have sickle cell. So we know the pre-existing conditions, again, because these are all the subject of systemic racism, which Joe Biden speaks about with authority and with courage and purpose. These are the things that have contributed to the numbers we're seeing in terms of the deaths and the disproportionate deaths of Black Americans because of the pandemic. Let's look at the environmental impact. So people aren't talking about that, but Donald Trump, do you know, just in the last couple of weeks, rolled back the restrictions on gas emissions. Why is that important? Because we, under President Obama with Joe Biden, said that we need to bring those things down because it affects the ability to have clean air and breathe clean air. Why is that important right now? Because in the midst of a pandemic around a respiratory virus that attacks the respiratory system, Donald Trump lowered the standards for gas emissions. Let's talk about where we are in terms of the incarcerated population. I have been calling on the Attorney General, who thinks he's the personal attorney of Donald Trump, Bill Barr, to address the issue of our incarcerated population, and in particular around what the Bureau of Prisons should be doing to not only make sure that the folks incarcerated are kept safe, but also to release those who clearly are no threat to their community, in particular people who have health conditions, are they part of the aged population who are incarcerated, pregnant women. But yeah, we've seen literally no meaningful action by this administration. And then let's look at the economic impact as it relates to Black Americans because of the COVID virus. Well, let's look at it this way. We know that it is in the best interest of our collective health that people stay at home so that we can stem the tide, we can flatten the curve. Well, listen to this. Over 50% of people with a college education or higher can work from home. Only 4% of those with less than a high school diploma can work from home. And what we have seen are the statistics that show there's at least a 10% differential between African-American workers and white workers in terms of those who can work from home. Let's look at the education level. Over 3 million students in our country do not have access to the internet. I spent a lot of time in places like South Carolina and other rural areas of America, together with Joe Biden, who talks about this all the time. For all of those families and those children who do not have access to the internet, they're not possibly going to get the benefit of being educated from home because they're just not going to have access to the technology. Joe Biden has a whole policy that's about HBCUs. I'm a proud graduate of Howard University. Well, let me tell you this, even before this pandemic, we saw that almost 40% of college students are food insecure. And Howard University did a study as a sample of HBCUs, and over 70% of their students were food insecure. That was in 2019. Now you compound what is happening with our college students having to go home and also not having access to laptops and the internet. And it's a real issue in terms of the racial impact on the education level of not only our K through 12 students, but also our college students. So all of that brings me to just add a couple more things. And this is really about why we have to do everything we can to elect Joe Biden. So on this and so many issues, he's got a plan, because he knows, he has seen these things and he understands what action is necessary. So Joe Biden is saying, let's collect data. Let's collect data so that we don't have to complain about what we have historically known are racial disparities. The numbers will speak for themselves, but the federal government should collect those numbers based on race. Joe Biden is saying there should be free testing and treatment for everyone. Regardless of race, everyone should have access to free testing and treatment. He is saying that there should be an equitable allocation of recovery funds. What does that mean? That's a fancy way for saying what Joe always talks plain talk. He speaks straight. And what he's saying is that I want to make sure every community gets enough so that they end up being equal. So that's a real different point than equal share. He's talking about equitable, meaning at the result will be everyone ends up being equal. Joe Biden is saying he's going to expand unemployment insurance. We have at least 26 million people. By the end of this week, we'll probably hear there are many more who lost their jobs in just the last 5 weeks. Joe Biden is talking about getting unemployment insurance to those folks and all who need it. And finally, a very, very important point that Joe always speaks about is the need to make sure that people don't go hungry and are fed. And so he is talking about expanding SNAP benefits in a way this administration has refused to do. And he's talking about doing it so that it also gets on people's EBT cards, so you don't have to wait for months to get the check in the mail, but instead can have the relief immediately. So in conclusion, I'll say this. We already knew before this pandemic hit that we have got to have a real leader in the White House to face the challenges that we face every day. This pandemic has brought it front and center. And just like we are all this close to our screens looking at each other for this conference, we are looking at this pandemic and the need for new leadership right in our faces. And we have got to do everything that is possible, everything in our power to elect Joe Biden as the next president of the United States. He's got a plan. He speaks from his heart. He understands people's struggle. He feels that struggle in a way that he always acts to take care of people and lift them up. So with that, I want to thank everybody again, and I'll turn it back over to Simone.
Thank you, Senator Harris. You know, it's true. Vice President Biden has a plan, and he has been here, not exactly here before, but if we look back to the Recovery Act, an $8 billion program that Vice President Biden was intricately involved in helping to manage. And if you juxtapose that with what we're seeing from the White House right now, we are seeing a lack of leadership, a lack of governance, and it is hurting communities across the country. I want to turn now to some of our panelists who are going to briefly discuss the impacts that COVID-19 are having on African-American communities and communities of color from their various perspectives. And I think a really great place to start is with Congresswoman Marsha Fudge. Congresswoman Fudge, you know, you serve Ohio's 11th congressional district. You you have served since 2008. You were formerly the mayor of, I believe, Warrensville Heights, Ohio, a suburb of Cleveland. And you've been a leader on this issue. And Senator Harris has been vocal and outspoken in the Senate, but you have really been one of the leaders in the House when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to SNAP benefits specifically, but also when it comes to implementation and oversight. And we know that the United States House of Representatives is specifically invested in instilling some oversight as it relates to the government's response to the coronavirus, COVID-19. So if you could talk a little bit about that from your perspective, but also what are you hearing from your constituents in out there in Cleveland, Ohio?
Thank you very much, Ms. Sanders. I appreciate being with you all today. And Senator, thank you. I just want to say just a few things so we can get into some of the questions. But I would say that Black people have always been aware of systemic and institutional racism. COVID-19 just proved to the rest of the country that it exists. I have an election on tomorrow, and I have told people who are asking me why to be involved in this election. And I say to them, if we do not elect Joe Biden, we will not recover in my lifetime. I'm not being dramatic, I'm being honest. We would never be in this place had we had a real leader in the White House. If Joe Biden were there, this would have been handled very, very differently. And so we have to stop and think about how it affects us. The Congressional Black Caucus has been fighting for this for a long time. We're asking questions like, well, are we predisposed to have this disease? No, we're not. You know, they talk about underlying health conditions, but we're not the only people that have them. We live in a country that is obese, not just Black people. Heart disease is still the #1 killer in this country, not just Black people. Our problem is access. We don't have access to the healthcare we should have. And so when we report to a hospital, we generally report sicker. And so it takes a lot more to make us healthy again. So I would just bring to the attention that it was the Black Caucus who put in this bill mobile testing units so that people wouldn't have to try to go to a zip code that they can't get to be tested, but that would come to their particular neighborhoods. We put in their money for health clinics and rural hospitals, which is where most of us are treated. We understand what it means to be Black. And I think that it is important that the Vice President is saying to the rest of the country, he understands it too by allowing us to interact with people about these very things. So I would just stop at this point and just say that we're not going to change this nation's feelings about people of color, but we're going to certainly make it better as we go forward. So I thank you for allowing me to be a part of this discussion today.
Oh, thank you, Congresswoman Fudge. We appreciate your leadership and your support. And before we get into the Q&A, I want to now go to Bishop McKenzie. We have the illustrious Bishop Vashti Murphy McKenzie with us on this call today. Bishop McKenzie serves as the 117th elected and consecrated bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME Church, y'all. And as I think we've heard on a number of, we've read on a number of different articles, we've listened to it on the news, you've seen it on social media, that the Black churches are especially being hit hard by this virus. So Bishop Murphy McKenzie, I would love if you could speak to your perspective from the faith community, what you are hearing across the country from folks in the AME Church. I know, for example, that in Georgia's governor opened up places in Georgia this past Friday, and it was the AME Church that reached out to their bishops in Georgia and said to their pastors and told their congregations, do not open up your churches this Sunday. We have to be safe. We have to stay at home. This virus has yet not been mitigated. We are not to where we need to be. So if you could speak to some of the efforts of the church and what you're hearing from your folks, particularly in questions that people have about COVID-19.
Thank you, Simone, and to this illustrious panel, Senator Harris and Congresswoman Fudge, Dr. Brooks, God bless you. Thank you for including faith in this discussion, because it's going to take all of us to get through it and get through it to be better on the other side than we are right now. I've been talking a lot about every day that this pandemic will uncover those leaders who are strong and leaders who are weak, and the strong will rise to the top. And we have to be very focused and very clear to keep our strong leaders in place and get a change of leadership who will make better decisions for our community. Your race and your zip code now determines how government responds for you in a public health pandemic. When the issues of crack was happening in our community, if you were in a certain zip code, then it was criminalized. When the opioid addictions came forward, it was not criminalized. It became a public health thing. How can people who make this choice as a health choice, they don't deserve to be in prison, they deserve some health care. And now here we are again in this global health pandemic. And we're finding these disparities that have always existed come to fore. This pandemic has had a great impact upon the faith community. The African Methodist Episcopal Church is a global denomination. It is the oldest predominantly African-American denomination with 8,000 congregations worldwide. In Europe, in India, the Caribbean, Africa, and in the contiguous United States, and in Canada. And the majority of our congregations are closed because of this pandemic. Why? Because we are caring about the safety and the health of our constituency, of people who call our churches home and who live in the shadow of our citadel. The whole community, whether they are members of our church or not, become under our care, because we can be a bridge between helping agencies, including the government, to feed the neighborhood. We can be a bridge between health agencies, because many of our people don't trust health agencies. They're the last to go about issues that can be healed. And we can be that bridge between that. We can become testing sites and food sites. Many of our daycare centers and our educational institutions are closed because of this pandemic. And many of the people who are members of our congregation are frontline workers. They are truck drivers, they're garbage collectors, they work in grocery stores, they're doctors, they're nurses, they're in the surgical suite. And we need to find a way to keep them safe. Yes, everybody's concerned about the economy. And yes, everybody wants people to get back to work. But I tell you, while we are talking right now, the governor of the state of Texas, my district is the entire state of Texas, there's a whole lot of territory. The governor of Texas right now is having a press conference to open the state beginning this Friday. And is telling us that we can open our churches come Sunday. I'm going to tell our churches in the state of Texas, don't do it, because our constituency are in that area, are in that age range. They do have, their immune system has been compromised by high blood pressure, yes, obesity, all the other kinds of things, because they do not have the same kind of treatment in the healthcare system. Yes, we're going to tell our people, stay home and stay safe. The blessing is the church may be closed, but we're still worshiping in spirit and in truth. We have learned how to adapt and be able to still provide pastoral care and worship services to our constituency. The prayer meeting shut down, but we are still praying day and night, effectual prayer. When people are sick, call for the elders and let's pray for healing. We're not able to provide pastoral care in the way that we do, but we have figured out how we can drop groceries on the front doorstep of our seniors to make sure we're making care calls, Zoom calls, conference calls into people who are isolated to give them some sense of hope. That's when trouble hits, people come to rely on their faith. And we have not abandoned our faith, but we have stepped it up. We are adapting to it, but we need others to recognize that we are the ones who are feeding and keeping and helping the community to stick together. Don't isolate us from the table of decision. Include us in the table of decision. And I thank Joe Biden for including faith in this discussion today.
Thank you, Bishop. The Vice President regularly talks about how his faith is important to him. And frankly, how in these times, he believes people need empathy, that people are going through so much across this country right now. We are dealing with the economic crisis, a public health crisis. At this point, we probably all know someone who has lost a loved one, a coworker, to the coronavirus. It did not and does not have to be this way, which brings me to you, Dr. Brooks. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very pleased to have Dr. Brooks with us. Dr. Brooks is the current president of the National Medical Association, the NMA. And you've served many roles in the NMA. I'm sure we could do a whole Zoom call just on that. But I think it's important for folks to know that you are the medical director, a medical director for the LA Healthcare Plan. This is one of the nation's largest Medicaid managed care plans, and your mission is to provide access to quality health care for Los Angeles County's vulnerable and low-income communities and residents. I want to talk, I don't think we can take questions without talking about and delving into the public health aspect of this crisis. Just this morning, Vice President Biden, along with folks on his public health committee, released a statement. You can find it on Medium right now, ladies and gentlemen, about testing and what's needed to happen if we really want to reopen our economies. The bishop just talked about how the governor of Texas is talking about reopening this weekend or today. But we haven't done the necessary testing. We do not have the necessary contact tracing in place to safely reopen cities and states across this country. So please, Dr. Brooks, if you could just help set the stage for us for this conversation from the medical perspective and what you're hearing and what you're seeing from the folks that you are serving and the people that you represent from your organization.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Sanders, Simone. I almost want to say an amen to Bishop McKenzie because I really appreciate your remarks. I hope it's okay to say that on a Monday. And thank you for your remarks also.
Every single day, Dr.
And thank you very much, Senator Harris, for hosting this on behalf of the Biden team. I'm out here in LA. I'm also Chief Medical Officer at an FQHC Watts Healthcare Corporation. And we really appreciate the efforts of our senator and those that are being done that are representing us. So let me just speak to it. So look, in the United States, there are approximately about 1 million confirmed cases, which means people have been tested of COVID-19. Of those, about 55,000 deaths, okay? So about a 5.5% death rate. Now, the good news is I believe that that death rate is overestimated because we've only tested 1.5 to 2% of the whole population. The bad news is we have only tested 1.5 to 2% of the population. So we really don't know what's going on. I'm gonna speak to what Bishop McKenzie said. The AME church in Georgia, well, some other AME people, they weren't from Georgia, but they asked me to sit in Georgia, they're opening up, what do we do? So the NMA, National Medical Association, put out a press release saying that we don't think you should do that. And then in general, what's happening in Georgia, until we get more testing, and have a better understanding of the prevalence of this disease, of who has it, and do some quarantining, contact tracing, self-isolation. We really don't know what's going on. The way I look at it is what they're doing right now in Georgia is an experiment, and I don't plan to have my people be test subjects. So I'm not very comfortable with what is happening there. But let's look at the disparities, okay? So, you know, from New York to Chicago to Detroit to Milwaukee to New Orleans, and now out here to LA, we are seeing African Americans more adversely affected. Okay, overall, at the national rate, Senator Harris spoke to about 2.5 times, okay, overall, and varies from one area to another. I think the broad way to look at it is nationwide. Okay, so why? So the other two panelists and Senator Harris have spoken to, so I will just try to weave it all together. There are 3 fundamental elements. There are the comorbidities, and I heard Senator Harris say pre-existing conditions. I've been hearing a whole lot about comorbidity. I haven't heard that term, pre-existing conditions. So I really appreciate her saying that. Then social determinants of health. And then you have racism. You just can't, I've been saying implicit bias and race, let's say call it what it is, racism. So let's briefly deconstruct those. So with pre-existing conditions, the CDC has determined that after age, which I guess is a pre-existing condition, hypertension, diabetes, COPD, which is lung disease, and asthma lead to more problems, and obesity. So what do you see? African Americans, 20 to 40% more hypertension. Diabetes, 2.2 times more likely to have diabetes. Asthma, higher rates of moderate to severe asthma. Obesity, 30% or more higher rates. So this leads directly to more adverse outcomes. But again, this is a fabric that is woven together into one piece of cloth, and you can't use that cloth to cover yourself. This cloth is uncovering us. So next is social determinants of health. African Americans are uninsured at a rate of 9.4%, the white population 5.7%, so twice as more likely to be uninsured. In terms of income, our net worth of a white family is about $171,000, for a Black family, $17,000. That's the wealth gap. I call it the health gap. And then let's look at racism. Okay, there are studies that show when you factor out, when you don't include income, education, you still see adverse outcomes from African Americans. So what's left? Race. So race is an independent factor beyond social determinants and comorbidities. So that's a problem. So we need to address all of these issues. So what I basically say is disasters or pandemics do not create inequities, they expose them.
Say that again. I mean, the reality is this COVID-19, the coronavirus crisis, is exposing things that we have long since talked about, that comes up, you know, every now and then. But the pandemic has truly laid it bare. And I frankly think forcing us to deal with systemic ways to correct these systemic issues. Let's get into these questions that we've gotten from viewers who are currently watching. Our first question comes from Dr. Lakeisha Howman, who is the founder of the Village Market Network. Dr. Howman is from Atlanta, Georgia, and the Village Market Network connects Black-owned businesses to engage consumers, impactful resources, and investors, and it also helps create an ecosystem that reaches small business owners in about 21 states. So Dr. Howman is out there doing the work. Her question is, COVID-19 has exposed weaknesses in our economy, and especially for Black businesses, which already have issues to access to capital and business credit. Post-COVID, what is the way forward for Black businesses? She also goes on to ask, and what are some tangible ways that the government can and will supplement/support Black businesses as they recover? You know, Senator Harris, I don't know if you want to start with this, and then Congresswoman Fudge, you know, there's talks about work sharing programs, there's questions about the PPP money. So please, what do you have to say to Dr. Howman? What kind of hope can we give her?
Well, I first of all want to thank you, and on the point about Atlanta, let us praise the Mayor Bottoms.
Yes, thank you. Yes,
courage to to say that she was not going to adhere to what the governor is trying to do. And she took a lot of political heat for it. She received an awful text that her child read. And so I do praise her leadership in that regard. And also Dr. Brooks, I just also want to add a big difference between the current occupant of the White House and the next occupant of the White House, Joe Biden. So on the issue of pre-existing conditions, remember that Joe Biden, together under the leadership of Barack Obama, implemented the Affordable Care Act, which brought health care to 30 million people who otherwise did not have it. It was the most significant public health policy in America in generations, brought to us through the Obama-Biden administration. This is a public health crisis. Do you know that right now, Bill Barr, Donald Trump's Attorney General, is in the United States Supreme Court trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, which among other things, not only brought healthcare to 30 million people, but also said people with pre-existing conditions should not be banned from healthcare. So again, these are very tangible, real issues about who's in the White House now and who needs to get out. On the issue of Black businesses, part of what Joe Biden's platform is, and Marsha and I are members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and we've been fighting for this alongside Joe Biden, is we need immediate access to capital for Black-owned businesses. And that's about the minority depository institutions, so the financial institutions, as well as the CDFIs, which are basically community development financial institutions. Part of what was wrong with these last packages is that they did not carve out money for the small community banks, and that is part of what we fought for in the most recent package. And I can tell you that the Congressional Black Caucus, the CBC, we are fighting to make sure in the next big package that there is a very significant carve out. I'm particularly saying that there should be a tranche of funding for small businesses that have 20 or less employees. We know most Black-owned businesses have on average at least 10 or fewer employees, and we've got to target very specifically those businesses who did not receive the benefit of those previous packages. And Joe Biden has been fighting for this. We need money to set aside for these businesses, and then the SBA, the Small Business Administration, has to work much more closely and be required to work closely with community banks. So many of our community banks, our Black-owned banks, do not have a formal relationship with the SBA, which became very apparent over the course of the last several weeks. Under a Biden administration, I have no doubt that everything that he intends to do will happen and happen quickly around making sure there is that relationship between the SBA and small-owned businesses and Black-owned businesses in particular. Marsha?
Let me just say very quickly about them opening things. You know, they open the beauty salons and the barbershops and the bowling alleys and the movie theaters. When they start opening up the country clubs and the tanning spas, then I'm gonna go to one. That's first. Because they just opening up things that Black people go to because they know we've got these checks and they want us to spend them. They don't care about our safety. That's why when they start to open up things they go to, then I'll understand it's time for them to start to open up some things for us. Mm-hmm. But let me just tell you very quickly, in this last bill, there was $60 billion set aside for small businesses, what I call small businesses. You know, 2 years ago, we gave rich people a $2 trillion tax cut. So what we did this time is say, well, could you just give us a little bit of it? So we have $60 billion set aside for community banks, for credit unions, for CDFIs, for smaller lending institutions, which we hope small businesses have a relationship with. 30 billion of that is for institutions that have assets of 10 billion to 50 billion, and the other 30 is for those who have assets of less than 10 billion. So there should be someone, and that even includes churches, Bishop, there should be relationships that you can go and get those resources. They are forgivable loans. Yes. And so to help jumpstart your business after this pandemic is over, or at least we find whatever our new abnormal is that you would have resources to at least bring back your staff, to pay your rent, to do some of those things. Secondly, we're trying to get not just forbearance on your mortgages and your loans for your businesses and your homes, but to either have it forgiven or added to the end of your mortgage or your loan payment so that you don't have to make up 2 or 3 months of rent as soon as you go back and open up. As well as we are making sure that we at least address some of the systemic issues that Black businesses are having working with the SBA. So there will be things that'll help you now and help you going forward. It just takes Congress to do its work. And I think that you'll be fine.
Simone?
Yes, Bishop, go right ahead.
You know, I would say thank you, Congresswoman Fudge, that many of our churches have applied in that CARES Act and payroll protection process. They have applied, some have gotten them and some have not. And they didn't get them because, you know, they filed, and depending on the institution, especially if it's a large institution, they seem to have taken care of other kinds of customers before they came to the church. And then it was the smaller banks, churches who had relationship with smaller banks, who called them, who called the church and didn't wait for the church to call them. And so many, I can't say a whole lot, but some have gotten some help in this time. There's a business side of church, and there are churches with mortgage and churches with humongous staff that take care of the daycare center, the educational institution, the feeding program, the outreach program, all of that, who also need relief. And it's not enough to say, well, y'all just go file for unemployment insurance. We need to be able to take care of them so that we can come back after this is over and continue to provide quality care for our community.
I mean, the Senator Harris.
There
yes,
also
Dr. Brooks, go right
are
ahead.
small businesses that people may forget about, which are the sole and small group Black doctors. And they need support because right now visits are down and they take care of the Black patient. So I would say don't forget them in terms of these business loans.
So Senator Harris, you know, we have heard a lot about the Defense Production Act as it relates to ventilators and personal protective equipment. But Vice President Biden has talked about operationalizing the Defense Production Act for financial institutions. Because what I'm hearing, and the Bishop and Dr. Brooks spoke to it, and Congresswoman Fudge especially, that the folks that need it, these small businesses, often Black businesses, were not pushed to the front of the line. You know, the big companies. I saw a lot of companies, I couldn't believe that they got the small business loan. Yeah. So if you wanna touch on that for a second?
Yeah. So the details of it are pretty much this. And now to anybody who is a small business owner watching this, or you have a family member, friend who's a small business owner, have them go to the SBA website, which is www.sba.gov. Here's the issue. A lot of our community banks were not certified by the SBA. And the way that the deal went down, it was SBA certified or approved banks that get the money to then give to the small businesses. What Joe Biden is fighting for as part of his plan is to expand the number of small banks and community banks that are approved by the SBA so that they can then get the money to those who are intended to receive it, which are the true small businesses. And to the point that we're making, and this is about the barbershop and the flower shop and the beauty shop, and making sure that the nail salon, making sure that people get the money that deserve to have it. But this is part of the challenge. And again, who is president of the United States matters, because it is the president of the United States that can direct these federal agencies. The SBA is a federal agency. And Joe Biden has already indicated that is part of one of the reasons he is running, and his role of leadership in the midst of this pandemic and going forward, which is to make sure the Small Business Association actually understands what a small business is, instead of it being a publicly traded company or a big corporation that pretends to be a small business, that it is truly those businesses that have 20 or fewer employees, or 10 or fewer employees. And so that's part of what's going on in terms of this moment, but also the need for a new president. It's real.
Absolutely.
There's a connection between what we're experiencing and who gets to call the shots. And the president of the United States, in a moment of crisis, to your point about the Defense Production Act, Simone, it's the president of the United States who has certain tools in his tool belt in a moment of crisis. And it matters who is wearing that tool belt, who has the authority. And that's why we need Joe Biden to be, because look, this election is just in a few months, November. This crisis is going to go on for years. For years, we are not even close to getting a vaccine, folks. We're not even close to getting a vaccine. So all of this, even until we get a vaccine, is going to go on probably for another year. The recovery process to get everybody back up on their feet is going to take some time. We need the right person in the White House to carry us over this bridge. And that's Joe.
That's Vice President Biden. I mean, look, President Obama said it in his endorsement video of Vice President Biden. This crisis has laid bare a number of things. It shows that good government matters, good leadership matters, leadership that listens to the scientists matter, which brings me to our next question. This question comes from Mayor Eric Simmons of Greenville, Mississippi. His question is, in a state where African Americans make up 38% of the population, but represent 56% of COVID-19 cases and 72% of deaths, how do African American leaders put in place aggressive measures to protect our folks when governors like those in Mississippi, Florida, and Georgia are not doing what we think is in the best interest of our citizens' health and safety? This is key. I will just throw it out there. Y'all go ahead and just jump in, because this is exactly what we're talking about. Folks across the country are scared, and they are looking for leaders who are going to, one, lead with science, like Vice President Biden always talks about, but two, tell them what's in their best interest. So please.
Yeah.
What do these leaders do?
Oh, please, Representative.
No, you go ahead, doctor. You go right
So
ahead.
what I will say is this: first of all, take care of yourself. So that's the first thing. And if you can't get to a doctor, use telehealth. But more importantly, to the messaging. There have been messages out that I have heard that Black people can't get COVID. There's a mistrust of the health community. I would say you need people like Bishop McKenzie and Representative Fudge, Senator Sanders, to speak truth to power. You have to listen to those people who you trust. You have to advocate for yourself, but in the end, you have to look to those who you trust. I mean, the National Medical Association speaks for people of color, not just physicians of color. So I think it is imperative to find those sources of information that are accurate, that speak to you, and listen to them. And it's like the bishop, like Senator Sanders. So, and then message to our community, from us to us.
Let me just say this, as a former mayor.
Yes, Congresswoman, please give us the perspective.
As a former mayor, you build relationships, just as we were talking about banking. Mayor, I happen to know your congressman, and I know some other people in your state. You must demand from them testing. Testing is where it starts. We have put the resources in to do mobile units to go to communities and test. Testing is number one. You talked about contact tracing. We must know how big the problem is. Secondly, because we have put resources into rural hospitals and community health centers, you then need to make sure that those facilities are prepared to do the work that is necessary to treat our people. But the biggest thing you have to do is make sure that your people know to get tested. You need to know that they cannot wait until they're about to die to go and get tested, because that is what we do. We understand that we are the people who cannot socially distance. We live in apartment buildings. We live in dense communities where your grocery store worker, your policeman, your fireman, your EMS worker, your orderly at the hospital. We understand there are certain things we cannot do. But we do also know that we are just as likely or more likely to get the disease, so get tested. You can catch it. You will catch it if you're in those environments. You have to protect yourself. And everybody needs to do, that's the first thing to do. They tell you that when you get on the plane, put your mask on first. So put your mask on first.
Put your mask on and secure your seatbelt.
Right.
In that op-ed, the vice president, yes, secure the seatbelt. Congresswoman, in the op-ed, or the statement, if you will, it's on Medium. Again, guys, check it out. Medium.com/Joe Biden. Vice President Biden put out a statement along with his public health committee, specifically talking about this issue of testing and what's needed to reopen the government. He's called for President Trump to enact a pandemic testing board, just as FDR enacted a war production board to massively scale up production, of testing right now. So this is really a question of leadership. And so I think to expand on the mayor of Greenville's question, what happens when there is a failure of leadership currently in the White House and in governor's mansions across the country on this issue?
Well, then we have to step into the gap. We have to fill the void because there is a void there. We just at least make enough noise so that people will have to respond to us. We are voters. We are in many positions of authority throughout our states. You know, when they talk about not giving money to state and local governments, my first job was with the state government. Most Black people that come out of college, at least my contemporaries, we all got jobs with the government. My friends with degrees went to the post office, went to other places. So you're talking about a lot of African Americans that are in government. Let us use the people we have and let us be the squeaky wheel, because at some point they will respond and we need to make them do it.
And I concur with that. There is more than we think. In other words, push the envelope. Contact your county health department. Senator Harris has put forth legislation for more testing, for contact tracing, for getting data that's racial and economically and ethnically sound. So we appreciate that on the National Medical Association. But there is, like in LA right now, there's testing. So in those areas there are, and you have to demand, like, knock the door down. There is implicit bias. You may go, there are studies where people go to the hospital and they say, you don't need to be tested, then they go home and die. So when you go to a hospital, you feel you need to be tested, you're sick, don't leave until they test you. And she was also right about the fact that now we're finding people with low oxygen levels are walking around, don't know it. So if you think you're sick, go get checked. And again, just speak the way you would speak to your child when they did something wrong. I mean, just stand up for yourself.
One of the things, Simone, that we really have to do is to link our voices together. I think, in our community, we are speaking up. Pastors and preachers and clergy are speaking up. They just are not given the kind of platform where the voices are being heard on a broader basis. In Texas, you had to be referred by your doctor in order to get tested. You talk to your healthcare professional first, describe your symptoms, and then the doctor will refer you to testing. The open testing sites, big signs. If you have to have a fever of 99.6 before you can get in line to be tested. So there are all these hurdles. They say, oh, get tested, go get tested. But municipalities are putting hurdles in front of you getting tested. So you see these pictures of these long lines, you're not gonna get in it because you don't wanna be in line for 2 hours and then be turned away. So in order for us to turn that around, is that my voice has to link with your voice, and your voice has to link with somebody else's voice, and to bring the pressure to bear upon the people who are making those decisions. The word goes out, we have lots of test kits. Where? Not necessarily in the areas where we live and can have easy access. Many of our people cannot drive there. And so they have to either take public transportation, or it has to be in a neighborhood where they can go. Why? Because they're home with their children. And so now we're going to take the kids out, and they go out and come back, and somebody who's asymptomatic brings the disease back into the house. Now mama and daddy are in trouble. So we have to be sure that the rules of getting tested are straight across the board, that anybody who wants to be tested can get tested. And when the high-rise office buildings are open, what are you gonna do? You're gonna have a thermometer, no contact temperature taker, so that if you have a fever, you can't get in? And how can you tell just by looking at somebody? They may be asymptomatic, but they are shedding the disease as they go along.
Senator Harris, did you want to jump in on this point?
It's all been said, but listen, we know through experience, personal experience, and the stories in our families that this systemic racism in the healthcare system is real and longstanding. We know when we look at an issue like Black maternal mortality, another issue Joe Biden has taken a role of leadership on, we've all worked on this together, where Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in connection with childbirth than other women. And literally it has nothing to do with their education level, with their socioeconomic level. It is literally because when she's a Black woman walking into a health clinic or a hospital, she's not taken seriously. I say all that to say that it's clear that there is this racism in the system and these disparities. So we know these obstacles exist. Force them to see you. Do not let anybody quiet you. Do not let anybody tell you that you are exaggerating what you know you feel. This just exists in the system, and we cannot let it suppress us, and we cannot let it turn us away when we need to get help. We got to fix the system. But until then, know that when you feel something, that it is legitimate and that we all stand by you, knowing it's legitimate, and you walk in there and wait until you are seen. Don't walk away because somebody is treating you like they don't believe you. You stay there until you get treated.
Such a powerful assertion, Senator Harris. I know we're getting short on time, but I want to get to this last question because I think it's really important. We touched on this. You know, we talk about going into the doctor's offices, making sure, you know, do not let them turn you away. But the reality is a number of folks in this country are uninsured. And so this question comes from Dr. Valda Crowder from Richmond, Virginia. And I would note that more people in this, a lot of people are still uninsured, but more people in this country are insured thanks to the Affordable Care Act. Thank you to the Obama-Biden administration. So Dr. Crowder's question is this. She's noticed some commonalities in global pandemics, and every pandemic exposes the weaknesses in healthcare. In our system, African Americans are more likely to be uninsured. We are more likely to live in medical deserts where hospitals have closed in urban or rural areas, and more likely to be denied a COVID-19 test. What policy changes will make a difference, Dr. Crowder asks? Well, I would just like to start in saying the first policy change would be one, ensuring that the Trump administration is not in court right now trying to take healthcare away from millions of Americans. And two, I think building on the success of the Affordable Care Act with Biden Care, Vice President Biden's plan to lower costs across the board, make sure everyone has ability to access. If someone is currently Medicaid eligible, they are automatically enrolled into the plan. So I would offer that that's one policy change that would make a difference. But please, the illustrious panel, I'm sure, has thoughts.
Well, let me just say this, and then I'm going to have to jump off the call, actually. I think a number of things. One is we don't have enough tests. And so because the administration has not taken the necessary steps to get enough tests for everybody, of course, if you look at the zip codes where the first testing was done, it was not our communities. So we need more tests to get to our communities. Secondly, I think that it is important for people to understand it's not just people who live in communities that don't have hospitals. I represent the best healthcare in the world. And my people don't have access because they're uninsured, or they don't feel that they are wanted in those facilities. And so I think that we have to, from our level, talk to the administrations of these various hospitals and institutions who come to us always wanting help. You see, just like now, they want help from us. We just put $75 billion into a bill to help healthcare workers. I think it's important that we did it, but they need to be responsive to the communities too. So some of that is on us. And we need to make them do it. Some of it is on the mayors in those communities. Some of it is on the county in those communities. Whoever runs those hospitals, or if they're privately owned, then we all need to talk to these people and say, look, you got this money, but you got it to help all the people, not just some of the people. So some of it is on us too.
Simone, in addition, we need to have national open enrollment. So,
say it again, please, Senator Harris. I don't think they heard you around the corner.
We need national open enrollment so people can enroll, and Vice President Biden will do that. We also need to expand Medicaid and Medicare, and that is something he has been talking about for a very long time. We also need, obviously, free treatment, and we're going to need, and here's the thing, guys, again, back to the point of vaccines. The vaccine will hit the ground. Some estimate as long as a year from now. That's probably accurate. We've got to make sure, because that vaccine is not going to be in mass production immediately. And so we also need to know that we have a president of the United States who's going to pay attention to all these disparities that we're seeing in full relief right now, and ensure that there is a fair distribution of the vaccine, taking into account race, racial disparities, zip codes, because when the vaccine hits, it's not going to hit for 330 million people all at once. And so let's again be mindful of the fact that who is in the White House come January is going to be so dispositive of who is going to get help relief, who's going to be seen, who's going to be heard, who's going to be understood, and who's going to get the vaccine. So, but open enrollment, expansion of Medicaid and Medicare, those are some of the important pieces that I think that obviously Vice President Biden cares about and we should all advocate for.
And may I speak to one thing, Simone?
Yes, Dr. Brooks.
Also, there's something called a Federally Qualified Health Center, FQHCs. This is where the uninsured can go to get health care. I'm Chief Medical Officer at one. So Representative Clyburn over in the House has spoken of increasing the infrastructure, increasing the number of federally qualified health centers such that they are more readily available for care. Then obviously, of course, we endorse strongly universal coverage. So we wouldn't even be talking about this if we had someone who gave us universal coverage. And that would obviate the whole need.
That would be Joe Biden. You know, we could honestly spend all day having this conversation because it's an important one. It's an issue that has not been getting enough attention, but thanks to Senator Harris specifically for her leadership, and Vice President Biden has been talking about this. I just want to say thank you to Senator Harris for hosting this conversation today. Thank you, Dr. Brooks, for your leadership and all that you all are doing. Bishop, I appreciate the work that all of the AMEs are doing across this country. You all are leading on this issue, and we are just so grateful for your voice. And I know Congresswoman Fudge had to leave us, but she is doing amazing work, not just in Ohio, but in the Congressional Black Caucus and across the country. Vice President Biden believes that this is an issue we can't talk enough about. We know that the coronavirus does not discriminate, if you will, onto how it affects people, but it is a virus that disproportionately is killing people of color, Black people, Latino folks, Indigenous, Native American, Pacific Islander folks in this country. And that is why it is important. We not only have this conversation, but we get to very substantive solutions. And those are solutions that Vice President Biden is committed to finding. I'm going to give the final words to our illustrious leader of this call today, Senator Harris. Senator Harris, you have just been beating the drum, if you will, on this issue, on election protection for this fall, on holding the Trump administration and officials accountable. So we say thank you for your voice and your work. And I will give the final comments to you on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Simone. And again, to everybody on the panel, this is an extraordinary group of national leaders, international leaders as well. Elections matter. Elections matter. So elected leaders, we have seen at this moment of this crisis, depending on who it is, we have seen leaders like Mayor Bottoms in Atlanta or Mayor London Breed in San Francisco. We have seen the leadership that people will take on because they know the people rely on them. And elections matter. We have seen a president in Donald Trump who lies to the American people, who does not embrace truth or speak truth, someone who is obviously so much more concerned about himself than the people he represents. And we have seen a failure of leadership that has resulted in great damage to our country. And the pandemic is not over. It's going to go on for a little while. So I cannot stress enough to folks, look, I'm here in DC. I see this stuff right up close. Who occupies that seat in the White House really matters. This election in November is going to determine so many things about our future. And it's going to be about literally our health and whether we live or die. It's going to be about the state of our economy and whether we have a job and are treated with dignity or not. It's going to determine where we will be for future generations, and it's going to determine it quite immediately. So I can't urge everyone enough. Let's please put everything we've got into, first of all, being safe and taking care of yourself. But let's make sure we all get out and vote. I have the Vote Safe Act, which also says let's require that we have things like curbside voting. Let's require we get to vote by mail. Let's require that there are standard wait times and it's not hours like they had in Wisconsin, but minutes. But let's take this election seriously, and just everybody be safe, and just thank you all. And we are, as the bishop said, as the doctor said, as the congresswoman said, as Simone said, we are all in this together. No one will be made to fight alone. And that's what Joe Biden says every day, that we are all in this together, and there is a place for all of us in this campaign.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Everyone, please go to our website, www.joebiden.com, to sign up, join the fight to restore the soul of this nation. We need you. We are in this together. And as Vice President Biden always says, this is the United States of America. There is nothing we cannot do. We will get through this. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Have a great evening.
Yeah.